Welcome everybody. I'm hoping that we're connected now. If you do see and hear me, please comment. Having some technical difficulties here. I'm not sure if I'm connected. So if you could please comment, let me know if we are live. I am Justin Armenta with JA Digitizing and the Embroidery Nerd, and we are here tonight with another Needle Bar Live and a special Digitizing 911. I am seeing some comments coming through, so that's good. We finally connected here. Sorry about the delay, everybody. There's a special listener out there I wanted to say hello to this evening. So if everybody's ready, let's get into it. So I'm going to read some comments here on who we have. We've got Barb coming in, and we have Marla Moore. Hello. We have Jesse. Good evening. I think the comments here are just slowly trickling in. So I was contacted by a viewer that was nice enough to take one of my classes in Long Beach this year, and emailed me on some questions on some a 3D puff design that he was digitizing, and I think he's a little new to digitizing, so he was trying to implement some of the stuff that that he quickly learned in one class of mine in Long Beach, and maybe had some issues of exact uh, settings and placement of all the sports stitches. So we're gonna go through it. We have Doug in the house as well. Hello, Doug. Yes, we're finally live, Doug. But thank you for coming. Thank you for sticking around, everybody that stuck around. So yeah, let's get into it. Let me get my screen pulled up here and share my screen here. All right. So let's go ahead and look at the photos first of the. There we go. Let's highlight that. All right. So these are some photos of the actual hat that was the sewn sample of his design. So just right off the bat, you do see a lot of areas that are closing up, especially in the V and the E areas, the top of the E here, which is going to cause some issues when you're trying to clean up the 3D puff. Those areas are a really tight fit, and so you're not going to get a really clean cut on the foam in those areas. So the main things he was asking about was support stitches like bridges and capping. Um, so these are the things that I just right off the bat, looking at the hat that he sent me, these photos that he sent me, I was just identifying those issues that I would definitely tackle. It looks like the EVE was the main source of the design kind of closing up on him. Um, the There was some issues to the in the middle of the A here. Again, that void is a really small void, so that's kind of hard to dig out that excess foam there. So so that's an area that I was gonna definitely give some attention to. Same here with the bottom of the N where that leg is meeting that slanting line coming down. So just those areas, those tight fit areas, are definitely something that I noticed right off the bat. But he also he sent me the file that he actually did, um, which is this one here. So let me hide the stitches. So this is the original artwork that he was working with. So when digitizing in 3D Puff, it's really important to understand that you don't necessarily have to digitize to the exact shape and size of the artwork. You're going to definitely want to make adjustments as you go, just knowing the nature of 3D Puff and what it does to the embroidery. Yeah, so you're not going to have to be so exact when you're trying to match your artwork. A lot of these changes that you make, if you are digitizing for somebody else, or if you're digitizing for your logo, these are slight changes that you're going to make, and you're not going to really completely change the integrity of the logo, but it's going to make those areas sew better. So something that's sewn cleanly and everything comes out. Um, you have the sharp edges, the clean edges, the easier edges to clean in your cleanup process. Um, all those areas are going to look a lot better instead of having the exact dimensions and shape of every element in the artwork. So yeah, there's a lot of adjustments that needs to go. Excuse me, that needs to happen when you're digitizing for 3D Puff. So let's hide the artwork, unhide the file. And what I like always do when someone gives me a file, I do a slow redraw. So he was using, kind of a tack down stitch to kind of get it going. I do like that he did pick this area to start that tie-in stitch because that is off the center of the hat, so you're going to avoid that seam. So one thing I did notice that there was a lot of traveling back and forth throughout the letters as he was sewing. Um, if you've ever taken one of my classes, I've always taught that you're trying to move through the design. You're trying to eliminate as many small stitches as you can, or as many stitches as you can throughout the design. So to try to complete the letter and the elements as you travel through the design instead of bouncing back and forth and traveling through several times, going over each other. We do have a question here. How small and big can you do 3D Puff? So, rule of thumb, I prefer uh, working with a satin stitch that's at least 2 millimeters. That's what can be done in certain situations, certain foams that you're using. I prefer 3 millimeters and wider to get a really quality um, satin stitch that's going to support that the denseness of the foam. So if you do have designs that have a lot of elements that are really small, that are sub 2.5, 2 millimeters, I wouldn't even approach that design as 3D Puff. You're gonna definitely want to do at least some elements in that design as flat, and then the rest 3D. And as we travel through this, I hope that answered your question, Jesse. Thank you for the question. Um, as we travel through this, again, just kind of noticing the back and forth. There are some areas that he actually trimmed from one capped area to the other. There was use of bridges that were placed in the correct places as far as the use of bridges. Uh, Again, the traveling back and forth was the biggest thing. Another thing I noticed, back it up here a little bit. The caps that he's using, they're pretty tucked up underneath the ends of the satin stitches. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually cause that cut of the foam too far inwards from the end of the satin stitches, and so that all that satin stitch that's past that capping is going to actually create a waterfall, and that's where you have the stitches that are basically falling over the edge of the foam. But in this instance, the cap, because this satin stitch is going to be sewing at the same time as that cap. That cap is so far in that you're not really cutting towards the edge where you want that clean cut of that foam. So they were just placed a little bit too far inwards, as far as not close enough to the end of those caps. And if you can see here, you see this cap, and there is the outline of where this satin stitch is coming around to sew. Speed this up a bit. That end cap is going to be tucked in quite a bit to the inside of that satin. So you're definitely going to want to do end caps that are going to go right to the edge of the satins. The whole point of an end cap is you need a stitch that's going to be perpendicular to the opening of those satins, since those satins don't have any needle penetrations at the ends of the satins. You need those needle penetrations to be perpendicular to it using those end caps. So again, a lot of jumping around as far as going from one end to the other. There's trims within letters that are unnecessary. Um, we do have a question here. Doug, can you run? Can a rounded end need a end cap? So if we're going to take a look at my file here, and it is going to show you that there's some rounded end caps that I did do, and depending on the shape and how much to a point that rounded end comes to, and if you're not ending in that rounded area, there are times where you can actually just kind of bring in the points of the ones that come to kind of a skinnier point, and that's going to be enough. I guess the needle penetrations are close enough that it'll actually cut the foam. As long as you're not doing a lock stitch in that area, because you're not going to want too many extra of those small little stitches that are in that small area. You're just going to cause a lot of thread breaks or even needle breaks. Um, One thing on the C, I did see that in here you can kind of see in the rendering that is a really tight curve that he's going to come around. Again, that density of that foam, you need to really kind of, um, I guess, take it easy on it when it's turning corners. A little bit more finesse when you turn around corners. There is a split stitch here. The split satin split is probably turned on for this satin, so that's something that I wouldn't use as well in the satin stitches. So um, for the most part, I mean, I don't know how long this particular individual has been digitizing, but if this is their first attempt at 3D Puff, I I don't think they're missing the mark by much at all. Some fine tuning, some adjustments here and there that I definitely saw. But if this is their first time, it's definitely kudos to them because it is a pretty good design. Um, Another thing I did notice, there was underlay turned on for the end caps. If you ever heard me speak on 3D Puff, I avoid underlay 100% when it comes to 3D Puff. The amount of travel stitches is going to be enough stitches that are adding to those elements that you're not going to want any extra stitches. It is that balance when you are digitizing for 3D, that balance between the density that you need to cut the foam and the least amount of needle penetrations on that foam that you possibly can. Um, hey, we have Frank joining us from across the pond. Good morning, Frank. Good to see you here. And I wanted to say hello to Cindy. I see that she did come back. Thank you, Cindy. All right, let's get into my file. Okay, so right off the bat, just looking at these at the design, just a visual take of my design. Um, you can see that I did opt to spread out these letters just a bit, so to avoid um, the crowding that we had with those, especially with like those letters, the E, V, E. Just space them out a bit, so not only is it visually appealing, but you could also get the your tool that you're using to clean up those areas in between and not really damage the embroidery when you're trying to dig out those really small areas. And we have a question from Doug. Could this design with letters so close not need to be trimmed between letters? If they're touching here, like the E and the L, I did allow this area to touch because it does still leave a gap enough um, between the E and the L in this area that this is going to be easy to remove that excess foam. So I wasn't too worried about just this space, and you wouldn't need a trim in between there, because these letters here, especially with the V closing in on itself, the back of the E, I can tell this area was a real problem area trying to dig out that excess foam. You have this area here too where I was trying to manipulate the bottom of the E to open up a little bit more to lower this part of the E so there's not so much tight area in here. So that's why I opted to, again, making adjustments to the design in order to get a better product. In my opinion, is definitely the better choice instead of trying to fight yourself and trying to get that design, to match the artwork exactly. You're not always going to get the best results in embroidery, not, much less 3D puff. So, all right, let's do a slow redraw. So again, I did start off that center seam, making sure that, there was a jump there, making sure that the tack down stitches are not going to be right in the seam because that's going to cause you a lot of problems, especially if you're using everybody's favorite hats. I won't mention what style. Uh, so um, using bridges on those areas that are perpendicular to each other. So those areas that are going to pull away from each other when that foam is getting cut. That is one example there, Doug, of a slightly rounded cap at this left side here. Actually, let's just do this. Hide the artwork. I'll pull these out here. So I did use the edge of that cap to kind of create that rounded edge. Um, so you're not really relying on that top satin to create the whole a rounded edge part to it. I'm actually using the cap to kind of complete that shape to get that rounded foot on the E there. This was a situation here where, coming across with this bridge, I did use this bridge here that is going to support where these two elements, the horizontal middle of the E and the this upper arm going up. When anything that's crossing perpendicular to each other, it's going to have a tendency to pull the stitches apart, and there's a chance where that foam is going to want to try to peek out from that intersection. So that's where the bridge comes in, where it's tacking down that foam to make sure that it's not popping out. This point here was a rather sharp point, and I know I'm not ending here, so I'm not going to have any tie off stitches. So I'm not worried about doing a cap per se, because this, let me measure here. This piece here, I should measure the point. The point is sub 1 millimeter. So to have a cap in this area could cause a little bit too much bunch up of stitches. So I do opt it's going to jump over to this end, start here with a couple small stitches, and that's going to be enough to cut that foam. And it's working its way back this way. Hi, Frank. Yeah, we were actually talking about this earlier. I try to avoid anything honestly under 2.5 to 3 millimeters. I have done designs with 3D puff elements that are 2 millimeters. I would definitely suggest not anything under that. Um, and it really depends on what the foam you're using. I always advocate using really high dense foams, 3 to 4 millimeters. The ones that I use to try to get those really sharp, rigid corners that everybody's looking for on those big, bold designs. The smaller, thinner lines don't always work with those. So if you are really trying to push the limits and trying to do something 2 millimeters, I would go with a little bit softer foam. Some of the ones that are on the market work really well for projects like that. So hat who must be must be named. You know what I'm talking about, Doug. Everybody does. I just don't like talking bad about certain brands. So Cindy, love the new phone from SBSI. Yes, I have had tried it before. It is very very good. It is definitely one of the ones that I'm recommending now for a nice dense foam. Speaking of SBSI, I want to say hello to my partner that left me all alone today. Jeff's in Minnesota right now teaching at an SBSI function. Best of luck with him. I'm sure he's doing well for everybody there. So, but thanks for leaving me on my own and bailing on me, dude. Oh, I guess that was a Harry Potter reference. All right, so let's get back to it here. So yeah, there's the bridges and the perpendicular areas. There's the caps. And to answer your question there, there's no trim here. So I know the end of this E is going to be tucked up underneath the L. So I'm not worried about any trim there. Um, it did go from the end of that E, walked down and did the bridge here, walked back up, did the cap here, and then and again the minimal amounts of times that there's traveling through this letter is going to make sure that the that that pressure foot's not going through, not hitting that foam as many or as least amount of times possible. So strategically knowing that I want to get from here to down here, I'm going to do a bridge here. And the reason for this bridge here is because these two sections are meeting each other. And anytime you break a satin and you stop in mid satin and kind of travel to one end and bring it back to it, there's a potential that that foam there, because there's kind of that break in the sewing pattern, there's a potential that that foam is going to peek out. So that's where I like using a bridge, and then I actually will overlap these two elements that are coming together. And that just kind of ensures that you're not going to have any foam peeking out. So again, traveling through, I knew there wouldn't be a trim here, so wanting to stop this L here and continue on to the A, that's the structural integrity that you're trying to build in this section. We got a question from Cindy. Justin, would you use the SPSI foam on the left chest polo? I'm not a big fan of 3D puff on flats or on wearables. Not that it doesn't work, it can sew very easily. I just think the wear and tear of washing garments, hats are typically not washed in washing machines like flats are. So the wear and tear of the foam with so much pressure of the embroidery, it does start um, kind of distorting the design and the foam uh, pretty quickly. Definitely quicker than what a hat's going to last you before you wash it. So that's my kind of feeling on flats. I have designs in my stock library that's for full fronts of sweatshirts. I know it's popular. It's kind of a novelty thing in my opinion, but as far as longevity, um, I just usually use 3D puff on hats. So, but it's not that it wouldn't work. Like what's my favorite answer that everybody knows? It depends. So again, kind of going through this a least amount of traveling possible, walking down, doing this bridge, coming up again. These points here are coming to a smaller point, so I'm not too worried about, because this section right here isn't that big of a section. I already have a bridge. Just adding more stitches to try to get that capped end isn't necessary. The least amount of stitches that are can be possibly used in any given area. I always, try to do that the best or the as most as possible, trying to get the least amount of stitches in an area. So um, again, used a bridge because you have the three parts. You have the two vertical legs coming down from the top of the A. You have the top of the A there. So you have three sections coming together there. So there's bridges underneath there. Again, bridges and overlapping on the end. You have the end caps on the wider pieces here. Um, Again, those end caps, like Doug had asked earlier, the end caps are kind of shaped to finish that rounded edge look to those letters. So I'm not relying on those letters to come to really small points. So Cindy said, I'm not either, but my customer likes them. They ordered another set this year. I usually use the Gnold. Yeah, Gnold's a good one to use. I like using that. We have Barb. Cindy, do you send washing instructions for the pose with puff? That's a good idea. I don't know if there's necessarily any literature on that. unless those foam manufacturers do give you that. That'd be interesting to see. I've never read up on that. So, but that is a good point, Barb. All right, so kind of zooming in on the end caps here. Um, Let me stop this. Let's take a look here. So the end caps, I typically try to bring them out at least half a millimeter away from the edge of where your satin's going to stop. So you got to remember you're going to have push on this satin. So you don't want it pushing too far out because again, that's where you're going to get that waterfall look, and that's where the foam is cut here, and if you're ripping off the excess foam, in these areas, it's going to rip off at the cap. And if you have some extra stitches that are falling over that edge, it's going to give you that waterfall look. It doesn't give you a nice clean look. So it does extend out further. That was one of the things that I did notice in the original file, that they were kind of tucked in here, so they were cutting too far in, and you're going to have that loose edge to the a loose edge to the satin there. And then also they're pulled in a little bit from these edges because you're going to have the push from the caps themselves, so you don't want them pushing out too far past that satin. So if you did have those, from edge to edge to the satin, when it's actually sewn, you're going to have that edge pushing out. So that's where you're going to get those weird bulges that are in the corners of capping, if you've ever experienced trying to clean a 3D puff design. So I'm going to swing back over here, get back to my redraw. The main thing with the V was I was really focusing on opening up the area between the two legs here to make sure that there's enough room to get a clean uh, removal of that foam that's going to be between those two. So there is bridges again where these three elements meet. You have the two legs and the base of the V. You have the two capped ends that do have the kind of the wider shapes to them. Same with the bottom here. Uh, I did bring down this horizontal part of the E. I did shorten up this bottom of the E, so to make sure that this void of an area was easier to clean out. This is Daniil. This is actually the person that did submit the file to me. It made a lot of sense when I looked at the stitch out. Yeah, so a lot of times this is where a case where, especially when it's someone that's attempted to digitize themselves, it's not just a file that's given to them and they're having problems or anything like that. But it's at that cusp. I don't know if you're in the room yet, Daniil, when I was saying that if you are just getting into digitizing, or if you are just attempting 3D Puff for the first time in this file, you didn't miss the mark much at all. There was the idea was there, the tools were there, the bridges, the caps. They just might have been a little bit in the wrong place, maybe the wrong settings used. There was some underlay used, but the general idea of the usage of the bridges and the caps and stuff was there. So I guess you could say that I did teach you something, I guess, in Long Beach there. So Doug, did they use pull comp? Let me check that file. Let me go back to the original. There's a slight pull compensation used. Typically, I don't use pull compensation because the foam is basically creates the push that you need, or I guess the pull compensation, the pull that you usually have with satin stitches. Um, it's not going to be there because you have that really stiff foam underneath those satin stitches. So if you actually add pull compensation, you're going to add to to the problems that you have with areas that are closing up. So you're just adding that extra width on those satins. So I would not use pool compensation at all. Um, Let me check one other thing too. The travel stitches that he has here, they are at 4 millimeters, which is a good stitch length. I usually use 4.5 millimeters. So again, there was good usage of the travel stitches. Um, so there are some there that are at 2.5. So I would definitely stick to 4.5, 4 to 4.5 millimeters. If you're traveling a really large area that has plenty of coverage stitches, wide stitches. You can even go to 5 millimeters if you're not trying to make really tight turns or anything. Um, but yeah, you're trying to minimize the number of times that needle penetrates and the pressure foot hits that foam. So it's the minimal amount of times with the maximum amount of density to cut the foam. So it's a really hard balance to achieve. You kind of get a feel for it after doing it and adjusting so many designs so many times. Doug said, "I thought this may have been one factor with would have caused closing up issues. It can. So those really tight areas, I mean, those areas were ours as it was were really tight, especially like the legs that you see here in the V. Um, so I opened those areas up. As you can see, that gap is a lot bigger there. But as well, not using any pull compensation does help there. So let me see if there's any questions. Daniil says, I learned a ton. Second one I did came out great. That's awesome. That is awesome. You know what? I forgot to pull in the photos they gave me of the revised. So let me grab them really quick. Let's see if I can quickly find them here. Yes, Daniil was nice enough to share um, photos of the finished work. So it's always good to see the before and afters here. Let me turn off my grid so you can see that clearer. So yeah, that's the file that I provided for him with all the changes that I made. As you can see, I mean there's even a chance here where you might, if you wanted to, bring the V and the E closer. Move it a little bit closer if you wanted to get closer to your artwork. The fact that it's avoiding a little bit more of that seam, that's a bonus. So I wouldn't say that you really have to do that. But if you can see here, all these areas are large enough voids that when you're doing your cleanup process, you're not really digging really hard into those areas, and eventually you're going to cut either your thread or your hat, or the foam's just not going to want to release from those areas if those voids are too small. So yeah, opening up those areas really cleaned up those edges. You're not having those those tight little areas that excess foam is staying inside. The middle of the A is opened up. Um, Again, these areas of the L and the E, they've opened up. So just overall, if we compare the two, scale this down a bit. So yeah, those are the two differences there. So there's a lot of the crowding. That's the first thing that comes to my eye is the crowding. Um, the excess stitches that you're seeing out here, I think that was just because this E, there was a lot of traveling in this E back and forth. So again, a pile up of all those extra stitches that are underneath your top satin stitches, they are going to have a potential to, if it's closer to an edge, they possibly could roll off that foam and eventually start sticking out from the top satin. So that's another reason why you're really trying to eliminate the excess stitches underneath the top satins. Um, Trying to travel down the center of the foam or the center of the satin to make sure that it's not near the edges of the foam. So yeah, this is the comparison to the before and after with just those minor changes. It's not. This isn't definitely one of the ones that we've had before where we've completely had to redigitize portions of the design. Um, this was, I got in there and I may have redone some stuff. So, but just to kind of show him the proper procedure when it comes to the end caps and the bridges and the traveling and whatnot. Um, but it's something where if he and I had a conversation. Um, Sorry, he says, I think the positioning of the saw between, I think that was the positioning of the saw between the V and E. And you pretty much get just one pass. Hope it covers well. Exactly. Um, but yeah, it's kind of just the traveling through the letters is one of the main things. Eliminate the any excess waste that you possibly can. The proper the proper placement of the end caps to make sure that they are cutting where you want them. They are just slightly going over or past the end of those satin stitches. So when the end of those satin stitches push, the pull of the edges of the end cap and the push of the edge of the satin, those are going to meet naturally. Um, Barb says, big difference. The text in the second is much easier to read and is more crisp. Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing that I always strive for when it comes to 3D Puff is the cleanliness and how crisp the design looks. Um, I don't like designs that are real cluttered. I think it causes the cleanup process to be even harder. If you do have a tool like my tool, the 3D Puff Pro tool, um, that is definitely a tool that's going to help you. Maybe the flat cutting side of my tool could have possibly get into those really really tight crevices, but there are times even with those that having those really tight areas, it sometimes those stitches will just want to hang on to one corner. So trying to tear it off cleanly doesn't always happen, and it's too much excess foam. So the heat gun's not going to really help that much. The heat gun's just for those really small fragments that you get along the edge of those satins. So clarity is so much nicer with spacing. Yes, I agree. I agree, Cindy. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of what I did in this design. Um, yeah, Danielle says my version was horrible to Terry. Yes, that's definitely the cleanup process is definitely something that is kind of a drawback of 3D Puff. Um, and if you can make your life easier before you get to that process in the digitizing and how it sews, you're already halfway there on the cleanup process. So um, what I suggest is always using the proper techniques, uh, the longer stitch lengths for your travel stitches, the proper placement for your end caps. Um, Using bridges to support those areas that are perpendicular to each other or crossing over each other. Um, the least amount you can of trims, just because tie-in stitches and trims, those are really really small stitches. So um, fighting that with the foam, you want to try to avoid it as much as possible. Um, the spacing, making sure that the voided areas are almost as important as the actual satin stitches on how big or small they are. Um, so, so quality foam, proper digitizing, and it's going to make your life easier in the long run. It's going to make your design look better. So I'm glad I got to help out. I appreciate Daniil sending that over to me. I appreciate him allowing us to share it here on the needle bar. But if there's any more questions before I go, I think I will sign out just a few minutes here early. You must always increase prices, not just foam, but cleanup. I agree. If you're not charging extra for your 3D puff, you're not doing it right. Frank says, thanks, Justin. Great episode. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate you attending from England, our friend from England. And we have Jesse saying, thank you. I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Again, if you're here at the beginning of the show, there was a delay. For whatever reason, our streaming software did not want to cooperate tonight, and there was a delay. So Cindy's saying, thank you so much. Great. So always a pleasure to have you, Cindy. Thank you for coming in. I know you're always busy and you're watching and listening as you work. Danielle says very beneficial. Again, thank you for allowing us to share, Danielle. I'm glad I was able to help you out with this design. And so I am Justin Armenta with JA Digitizing Studios, here representing the Embroidery Nerd. Hopefully, next time you see me, I'll have my slacking partner with me. So if he's not too busy. But again, thank you for everybody to join me. I hope you have a very pleasant evening.